What these institutes do is they tend to influence the attitudes of the public at large, and they tend to change what it is politically profitable for the politicians to do.
The history of Friedman with Atlas, has a prehistory, because I believe, if I have my dates correctly, that the first time that Anthony Fisher met Friedman was when they were returning from the Montpellier Society meeting in St. Moritz. That's when they had the first sort of quality conversation. They happened to come back together from that meeting. After that, I think the major relationship was of Anthony Fisher as one of the founders and chairman of the Institute of Economic Affairs in England, because Milton Friedman began writing for the Institute of Economic Affairs, as he had done for the Foundation of Economic Education with Leonard Reed.
Anthony Fisher moved to San Francisco in the late 1970s, and it was at that time that I moved to San Francisco in 1977 to join the newly formed Cato Institute. And Milton Friedman, having won the Nobel Prize in economics and having retired from the University of Chicago and became a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, he bought an apartment in the same building that Anthony Fisher and Dorian Fisher had their apartment. And so he did that in part because he knew Anthony Fisher from Mount Pelerin Society meetings, and therefore in the same apartment house they were frequently had dinner and were in communication.
Milton Friedman was so clear, and his ideas were so well ordered that I say he always lectured like from a book. This is great, but there's one time that he spoke so well, and I regret that he spoke from memory and just from his convictions. This was a Montpellier Society meeting that took place in Vancouver, in Canada, in the very early 90s. We had at least 3 Nobel laureates apart from him in front, all great scholars, and he was the speaker at lunch. And to this society, again, composed mostly of intellectuals, he told them, well, look, you guys are great, you do great work, but don't fool yourselves. If it wouldn't be for the Anthony Fishers of this world that produce wealth and then use that wealth to help spread the message, to create better policy solutions and better ideas, we wouldn't have been able to begin to turn the tide in favor of freedom.
Milton Friedman and Rose Friedman together were very active in the Atlas Foundation anniversary dinner, which was and program, which was an all-day program in San Francisco. And Milton Friedman there was able to present for the assemblage a lot of memories. Some of the people there would remembered back a good number of decades, and to put in context his own appreciation for what Anthony Fisher was doing, and the appreciation for the work that all the institutes were doing. He really appreciated the development of the institutes and the fact that it was operating across the world, that institutes around the world were organized around the ideas that he thought so highly of, and were implementing them in each of the countries.
The greatest threat to freedom of thought, freedom of personal freedom, remains what it's always been: powerful governments. Powerful individuals can at times threaten freedom, but that's not so difficult. The real difficulty is when governments threaten freedom. And it is not only governments that call themselves communist that threaten freedom. So-called democratic governments may very well, through their power, threaten freedom.
It was an outstanding experience. He was very, very generous. So that was one of the highlights of my celebrations at Atlas. When Friedman decided to create his own foundation to promote one of the two great policy battles, three, I would say. He fought three policy battles, big ones, although he was involved. The big ones were the draft, then the balanced budget amendment that he lost, and then just for a few votes, and today that's very applicable, we should reread Milton Friedman Battles for a Balanced Budget and Amendment. And thirdly was the education reform. And he was aware that it was going to take a lot of time. But he decided to leave all his fortune, and encouraging many of his friends in the think tank world, to devote a lot of effort there.
The competition from the private schools in Milwaukee has led to an improvement in the quality of the public schools in Milwaukee.
That's what you'll predict anyway, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Competition is the only thing that will really make people put up or shut up.
So it's the educational vouchers. I think it's very important for him. I think he was open to more radical policy solutions in education, but he thought that was the one that in his lifetime, and he could perhaps have a bigger influence. It has been more than 50 years since he came up with that. How consistent he was with his principles. That is something that it's a lesson for everyone and anyone who studies his life. He was faithful to his principles, so he said, after so many years after my death, my foundation has to close. So his foundation now is not called the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation. It had to just recreate itself and get its own funding, called the Foundation for Educational Choice. And the patience, the consistency.
About Milton Friedman, I'd say the first thing I would say is that he was brilliant. And the second thing I would say, perhaps in a sense more important, is that he was courageous. And he went against the mainstream and the fixed views of the economic profession, which was Keynesianism, and undertook to challenge it rather than just be quiet about it.
I was 26 at the time, and I recall that my debate with Friedman from the floor as a know-it-all Latin American libertarian educated in the Austrian school. I thought they were never going to allow me into the Montpellieran. Then Milton Friedman was never going to speak with me again, because he was calling people like gold bugs, and I was using terms like paper worms. I was completely surprised when not only they accepted the nomination, but Milton Friedman became almost like a mentor, not only of myself, but of many of the young people that attended Montpellier, and I used to gather them and bring them to Milton. Milton, can you spend 2 hours with them? And he did. And those times were amazing. So I think Milton Friedman was so generous with his time, especially at Montpellier Society meetings, that many of the efforts that are not told in his biography and history took place just because Milton spent time writing a personal letter, receiving someone in his house, giving some good words of advice. So those were my early recollection of Milton Friedman as a human person, and my first recollection of when Anthony Fisher met Milton Friedman. It's great to be able to celebrate Milton Friedman's contribution to the Free Society over and over again. Some of the reforms that he pushed are still to come, but they will come, I believe.